it's currently before you, the bill would prohibit the use of spotters, which would be defined as people looking for unauthorized parked vehicles for the purpose of towing, and that would be their primary task. Primary task being defined as 50% or more of your time or compensation based on that activity. And I know Councilmember Hucker expressed, I think, a desire to kind of expand on that a little bit. That there was a concern about tow truck drivers acting as spotters and maybe limiting it to people who more than half their time or money comes from that activity wouldn't necessarily solve the problem. So I went back and I looked further at what other jurisdictions are doing, and there are a couple of different models. One is the spotter model, which is in our bill. There are some jurisdictions, very few. Orange County, Florida is the one that's referenced in the packet, which just across the board prohibit the activity of spotting. It's not about time or money. It's you can't do that activity.
If we were to adopt a grace period, it would ensure again that the punishment fits the crime and that you're giving some latitude there. So I think we could create hypotheticals in which this doesn't make sense. I concede that, and we've all talked about how this is not going to be a perfect law, but I think the committee's objective is to have a high standard with respect to a tow, and to minimize the current incentive mechanism that's in place for towing at a moment's notice. So if we achieve imperfect justice, but in a slight, tilting it in favor of our residents,
Right.
I feel like that's a worthy objective.
We are addressing spotting by requiring a written record that can be documented that the property owner authorized the tow. What Mr. Hamlin is suggesting now is just to make sure that the statute that is enacted by Montgomery County doesn't make it too easy for there to be a legal challenge by saying that there's a conflict between you prohibit spotting, but you require photographic evidence, which is what the state law does. It might be a way of addressing it by saying that taking a photograph for purposes of a walk-off doesn't constitute spotting. But what's really going to stop spotting, which is very difficult to control behavior, and no law is going to do it perfectly, is to require the property owner to provide a written record prior to the time that the tow occurs. As opposed to the towing firm doing it and then backing it up and saying to the property owner, you wanted me to tow that car, right, after the fact.
I had lunch with one of the biggest property owners in my district last week, and he said, okay, in a extremely popular competitive parking lot that they have to manage, that they have, they've striped it all in every space. It says 2-hour parking, not just, because they decided their signs weren't enough. Every space, has to say that right there. They spent a lot of money on that painting. Then, they let people who have parked more than 2 hours go to 3 hours. At that point, they give them a warning that they generate themselves. It doesn't have a fee associated with it, but it's just a warning to educate people about the fact that it's only 2-hour parking and that they're violating. And only at like 8 hours do they actually tow a car. That seems to me like responsible property management. And this is in an extremely, every one of those spaces is worth a lot of money, but they're, I think they have a long-term view of their customer relations too. And they know people aren't going to come back if they tow them in 2 hours in a minute.
If you had to pay $50 to walk across the street to get a cup of coffee, you probably wouldn't do it. And I'm sympathetic to people. I'm not comfortable when people tell me I parked here only for 5 minutes. If it says no parking, it says no parking. And you don't get a pass on that. And if I parked in a county lot and said I just walked in the Starbucks for a cup of coffee and I got a ticket for an expired meter, I would have no standing to come and say, well, gee, it was only for a cup of coffee, and I don't know why it's any different on private property. So, maybe we don't do something right now, but we ought to look at if it's at all possible to give people the authority to slap some kind of ticket on people to make them pay.